We drift into the snow-covered valleys of the Rocky Mountains, stepping softly into a time when life moved at the pace of the seasons. We explore the world of settlers who faced frozen winters in small cabins, relying on courage, ingenuity, and the warmth of both fire and family. Together, we journey through their days and nights, discovering how they survived, adapted, and thrived in one of the most challenging landscapes on the continent. So, settle in, breathe deeply, and let the quiet rhythm of history carry you into a world of resilience, warmth, and survival. Imagine a time long ago when the Rocky Mountains stood untouched, majestic and imposing, their peaks piercing the sky like frozen spires of stone. The air was crisp, thin, and biting, carrying the faint scent of pine and earth, mingled with the distant echoes of wildlife that roamed freely across the rugged landscape. It was the 1800s, a time when settlers ventured westward, drawn by the promise of land, opportunity, and the hope of creating a home in the vast unknown. These were people of courage, determination, and unwavering resilience, willing to leave behind the familiar comforts of towns and cities, and face the uncertainty of a wilderness that was as beautiful as it was unforgiving. The journey to the Rockies was arduous. Families traveled by wagon, horseback, or even on foot, carrying only what they could transport and what they deemed essential for survival. Each traveler faced the reality that nature was unpredictable and the mountains did not easily yield their resources to those who entered their domain. Rivers were frigid and swift, trails were steep and rocky, and winter approached with a quiet ferocity that could take even the strongest by surprise. The settlers knew, however, that to reach the land they desired to claim their piece of the Rockies, they had to endure these challenges step by careful step and prepare for the seasons that would follow. Winter was a season unlike any other, unlike the mild and predictable winters of more temperate regions. The Rockies brought a cold that seeped into bones, a wind that cut through layers of clothing, and snow that could accumulate in drifts taller than a person. For settlers, the approach of winter was not a simple change in weather. It was a signal to prepare, to strategize, and to build a foundation for survival. Months before the first snow, families worked tirelessly to gather supplies, chop wood, and select a location for their cabin. Every decision carried weight. Choosing the right site meant considering the terrain, the proximity to water, the availability of timber, and the protection offered against the relentless winter storms. These settlers understood that their lives would be measured by the rhythms of nature. They observed the behavior of the sun and stars, the patterns of snowfall, the migration of animals, and even the behavior of trees in the wind. This knowledge was not written in books or taught in schools. It was gained through careful observation, trial and error, and the wisdom passed down from those who had survived winters before them. The mountains were a harsh teacher, but for those willing to learn, they offered a life of independence, freedom, and profound connection to the land. As winter drew near, the settlers faced a dual reality, inspiring beauty and lethal danger. The first snowfalls transformed the mountains into a glittering expanse, blanketing the trees, rocks, and valleys in pristine white. Sunlight reflected off the snow, creating dazzling patterns and a sense of serenity. Yet beneath this beauty lurked the potential for hardship. Snowdrifts could block trails, freeze over streams, and make hunting or gathering nearly impossible. Blizzards could strike suddenly, bringing darkness and howling winds that seemed to shake the very ground. These were not mere inconveniences. They were life-threatening events, capable of cutting off a family from vital resources for days, weeks, or even months. To prepare for such challenges, settlers had to think ahead in ways that modern humans rarely do. They needed to anticipate the demands of the cold months, ensuring that their cabin, their supplies, and their skills were adequate to meet the trials ahead. Building a cabin was the first and most critical step. It was not simply a shelter, it was a fortress, a hearth, and a sanctuary. Every log selected, every notch cut, every gap filled with moss or clay was a deliberate act of protection against the winter that would follow. Settlers knew that a poorly constructed cabin could mean exposure to frostbite, illness, or even death. Conversely, a sturdy, well-insulated cabin could offer warmth, safety, and a base from which to continue life even in the heart of the most brutal months. Travelers arriving in the Rockies often carried a mix of hope and anxiety. On one hand, they were filled with dreams of new beginnings, fields to cultivate, livestock to tend, and homes to build for future generations. On the other hand, they were acutely aware of the perils that awaited them. Wolves, bears, and other wildlife roamed the forests and valleys, presenting constant danger. Rivers could be frozen, yet treacherous, hiding deep ice or swift currents beneath a deceptive surface. Injuries or illness could be catastrophic, for medical assistance was often days or weeks away. In this context, each day of preparation, each decision about where to place a log or how to chop wood carried profound significance. Settlers also had to adapt mentally and emotionally. The isolation of the mountains was profound, especially as winter approached. Snow would cover familiar landmarks, trails would disappear under ice, and the closest neighbor might be miles away. Children had to learn to occupy themselves within the confines of small cabins, while adults balanced the heavy demands of labor with the need to maintain hope and morale. Storytelling, music, and simple acts of community became vital tools for sustaining the human spirit. In this way, survival was as much a mental endeavor as it was a physical one. As families scouted locations for their cabins, they often considered subtle, natural features. Hillsides might provide shelter from prevailing winds, while slopes captured the maximum sunlight. Nearby water sources were essential for drinking and cooking, but too close, and they risked flooding or freezing. Trees offered timber and fuel, but forests could conceal dangers as well. Settlers learned to read the land with precision, understanding its moods, rhythms, and hidden hazards. They became intimately familiar with the sounds of the wind through pines, the patterns of animal tracks, and the ways snow settled in drifts, allowing them to predict and prepare for what lay ahead. The daily routines of these early settlers were governed by the seasons. As winter approached, long hours were spent chopping, splitting, and stacking wood. Food preservation became a priority, with root vegetables buried in cellars, meat salted or smoked, and grains carefully stored. Every resource was meticulously managed. Waste could mean hunger, and misjudgment could mean exposure to deadly cold. Skills were passed down within families, ensuring that children grew up knowing how to light a fire, insulate a cabin, and care for livestock in the harshest of conditions. In this way, survival was both a practical skill and a deeply ingrained cultural knowledge, cultivated through experience and necessity. Even as the settlers worked tirelessly, there was a profound sense of wonder in their surroundings. The Rockies, with their towering peaks, frozen rivers, and dense forests, evoked a quiet reverence. Sunsets painted the snow with hues of pink and gold, and the nights revealed skies so clear and vast that the stars seemed close enough to touch. For many, this awe inspired a deeper connection to the land and a recognition that survival was not merely about enduring hardship, but about becoming part of a living, breathing environment that demanded respect and understanding. By the time the first heavy snowfalls arrived, settlers had transformed their temporary camps into enduring homes. The cabins stood ready, firewood stacked meticulously, food stored and rationed, and clothing prepared for the coldest days. The families had learned to navigate a delicate balance between preparation and patience, action and observation. Every log in the cabin, every quilt on a bed, every careful placement of supplies was a testament to human ingenuity and perseverance. In these moments, as the cold wind began to sweep through the valleys, the settlers were not merely surviving. They were asserting their presence, their determination, and their resilience in the face of one of nature's most formidable challenges. As night fell and the mountains were enveloped in a blanket of silence, punctuated only by the distant howls of wolves or the whisper of wind through pines, settlers gathered within their cabins. The hearth glowed warmly, casting shadows on the walls, and the smell of wood smoke mingled with preserved foods. Children huddled close to their parents, learning lessons that extended beyond survival patience, resourcefulness, and the quiet strength that comes from facing a world that is both beautiful and dangerous. In those first winter nights, settlers came to understand the rhythm of the Rockies, the delicate dance between human ingenuity and the raw power of nature. And so, as the mountains slept under their icy mantle, the settlers slept too, wrapped in warmth, hope, and determination. They had endured the journey, chosen the land, and prepared themselves for the trials that awaited. They were pioneers, but in resilience and adaptation, carving out a life in a frozen wilderness where every choice mattered. Their story is one of courage, planning, and profound connection to the land, a story that invites you. As the settlers arrived in the Rockies, the first and most urgent task was to build a shelter, a cabin that could withstand the merciless cold, the howling winds, and the deep snow of winter. Unlike the comfortable homes they might have left behind in the plains or eastern towns, these cabins were simple, practical, and designed entirely with survival in mind. Every decision in their construction reflected careful thought, knowledge of the land, and a deep understanding of the demands of a harsh environment. Building a cabin was not merely carpentry, it was an act of foresight, creativity, and determination. Settlers often began by scouting a location that offered both protection and resources. A gentle slope or a natural depression in the land could shield the cabin from the prevailing winds. A cluster of trees nearby provided not only timber for construction, but also a windbreak and additional fuel for fires. Proximity to a water source was essential. Yet the settlers had to consider the risk of flooding or frozen streams. They sought a balance, choosing sites that offered security, accessibility, and practicality, knowing that the slightest misjudgment could make winter unbearable or even deadly. Once the site was chosen, construction began with cutting and preparing. Timber logs were the foundation of the cabin, and settlers selected them carefully, often choosing trees that were straight, sturdy, and free from rot. Axes and saws became the most important tools, and hours were spent felling trees, trimming branches, and shaping each log. The process was meticulous, demanding both strength and skill. Logs had to fit snugly together, with gaps filled using moss, clay, or a mixture of mud and straw to create insulation. The goal was to trap heat inside and keep the frigid air out. A matter of life and death in the approaching winter months. The construction process was slow, deliberate, and often exhausting. Families worked together, children carrying small bundles of kindling or helping to tamp insulation into cracks, while adults lifted and stacked heavy logs. Each notch carved into the wood, each beam positioned with care, was a step toward a safe haven. Settlers developed a rhythm, moving in coordination, learning from experience, and adjusting their techniques to suit the specific demands of their chosen site. Even the sound of the axe striking would become part of the environment, echoing across the quiet valleys as a testament to human effort and persistence. As walls rose and corners took shape, settlers focused on the roof, understanding that it was as vital as the walls themselves. Roofs were often steeply pitched to allow snow to slide off, preventing heavy accumulation that could collapse the structure. Some cabins used wooden shingles, while others relied on bark or other natural materials for coverage. Settlers learned to seal every seam meticulously, for even a small gap could allow freezing wind and snow to penetrate the interior. Every detail mattered: the angle of the beams, the overlap of shingles, the thickness of insulation, all contributing to a structure that would shelter them through the harshest months. Windows were another carefully considered element of the cabin, small in size to minimize heat loss. They often featured wooden shutters or panes covered with oiled cloth. The goal was to allow light in while keeping warmth from escaping. Doors were similarly designed, often thick and reinforced with heavy latches or coverings to prevent drafts. Settlers learned to optimize airflow, allowing smoke from fires to escape while retaining as much warmth as possible. Every aspect of the cabin's design reflected a balance between practicality, efficiency, and survival, honed through observation and experience in the wilderness. Inside the cabin, space was used strategically. Often, a single room served multiple purposes: cooking, sleeping, storage, and gathering. Sleeping platforms were elevated to stay above the cold floors, insulated with straw, pine boughs, or animal hides. Every inch of space mattered, and settlers arranged furniture, bedding, and supplies in ways that maximized warmth and efficiency. The hearth or stove became the heart of the cabin, providing heat for cooking and comfort for the family. Its placement was deliberate, often central to ensure even distribution of warmth. The settlers also had to contend with practical challenges beyond construction. Snow and ice made the work physically demanding, and temperatures could drop dangerously low, slowing progress and testing endurance. Every day brought new considerations: how to protect tools from freezing, how to carry heavy logs through snow, how to maintain balance on icy terrain. Despite these difficulties, settlers persisted, driven by the knowledge that the cabin they were building was not just a structure, but a lifeline, a sanctuary, and a foundation for the life they envisioned in the mountains. Materials were often adapted from the environment. Stones from nearby streams or hills were used to reinforce foundations or create a hearth, while moss, grasses, and clay served as insulation. Settlers learned to read the land, understanding where the best timber grew, which trees were suitable for beams, and how to gather materials without compromising the surrounding environment. This intimate knowledge of the natural world became essential for success in construction, depended on using resources wisely, efficiently, and collaboration. And shared knowledge played a crucial role in cabin building. Families often worked together, with older children assisting adults, neighbors lending tools, and settlers exchanging advice about techniques, materials, and strategies. This sense of community, even in remote areas, helped ensure that cabins were sturdy and functional. Skills were passed down through observation and practice, becoming part of a cultural knowledge that combined ingenuity, tradition, and adaptation to one of the most challenging environments in North America. Weather influenced every aspect of construction. Settlers timed their work to take advantage of milder days before the deep winter set in. They learned to anticipate storms, recognizing the signs of approaching snow, ice, or wind, and adjusting their schedules accordingly. Construction in winter was nearly impossible, so preparation and foresight were critical. Families often worked from early morning until dusk, balancing the demands of building with hunting, gathering, and food preparation, knowing that the success of their cabin depended on their ability to manage time, resources, and labor effectively. Even the smallest details were important. The orientation of the cabin could influence warmth, with south-facing walls capturing maximum sunlight. Doorways might be positioned to shield occupants from prevailing winds, and the spacing of logs and shingles could reduce heat loss. Settlers understood that survival was determined not only by strength and labor, but by careful planning, observation, and the subtle application of knowledge gained from the environment. Each cabin became a testament to this understanding, reflecting both practical skill and an intimate relationship with the land. Inside, the atmosphere of the cabin was warm, safe, and comforting, a stark contrast to the frozen world outside. Fires crackled in the hearth, casting flickering light over walls lined with tools, dried herbs, and household items. Children played quietly, learning the rhythms of cabin life, while adults tended to tasks that ensured continued survival. The cabin was a place of activity, warmth, and security, but it was also a place of learning, reflection, and adaptation. Every day, settlers refined their skills, adjusted to new challenges, and deepened their connection to both the land and their home. Building a cabin also demanded patience and resilience. Mistakes could be costly, and setbacks were inevitable. Logs might split, insulation might fall out, or weather could delay progress. Yet settlers approached these challenges with persistence, creativity, and ingenuity. They adapted techniques, experimented with new materials, and learned from every failure. In this way, the cabin became not just a structure, but a symbol of human determination, a physical manifestation of the settler's ability to endure, innovate, and survive in an unforgiving environment. The experience of building a cabin was transformative. It required not only physical strength, but mental fortitude. Settlers learned to think ahead, to anticipate needs, and to balance immediate demands with long-term survival. They developed routines, strategies, and rituals that became essential for enduring winter, from stacking firewood to arranging sleeping platforms, from insulating walls to maintaining tools. Every action contributed to the security, comfort, and resilience of the household. The cabin was more than shelter. It was a testament to human ingenuity, adaptability, and the capacity to thrive in harmony with nature, even under the harshest conditions. As the walls rose and the roof took shape, settlers could begin to feel a sense of accomplishment, a quiet reassurance that they had created a space where their family could survive, rest, and grow. The cabin stood as a small yet powerful victory. Against the cold, a tangible reminder that careful planning, hard work, and resourcefulness could transform the wilderness into a home. It was within these walls that families would face the deep snows, the biting winds, and the long nights of winter, finding warmth, safety, and a measure of comfort amid the vast frozen landscape. By the time construction was complete, settlers had gained not only a cabin, but a deep understanding of their environment. They had learned the qualities of different woods, the behavior of snow and ice, and the subtleties of wind and weather. They had developed practical skills and knowledge that would sustain them for years, creating a foundation not just for survival, but for life in the mountains. The cabin became the center of existence, a place of warmth, sustenance, learning, and family connection, reflecting the resilience, creativity, and courage of those who built it. As winter approached, settlers knew that their success in surviving the cold months would depend on heat. Fire was life in the Rockies, a necessity so vital that every plan, every action, every ounce of labor revolved around ensuring warmth. Without fire, the wooden walls of their carefully constructed cabins offered little comfort. Without fire, survival became a constant battle against frostbite, illness, and exhaustion. It was not enough to simply build a cabin. The cabin had to be alive, with warmth, the hearth glowing steadily through the long nights, providing comfort, safety, and a sense of home would become the most precious resource. Settlers spent countless hours cutting, splitting, stacking, and storing firewood in preparation for the months ahead. Selecting the right wood was an art and a science. Hardwoods like oak and hickory burned slowly and consistently, providing long-lasting heat. Softwoods such as pine and spruce ignited quickly but burned faster, offering bursts of warmth that were essential in the coldest moments. Knowledge of wood types, moisture content, and burn patterns was crucial. Experienced settlers could listen to the crackle of a log and know its quality, predicting how it would sustain a fire throughout the night. Storing firewood required foresight and strategy. Wood had to be stacked carefully, often in covered piles near the cabin, but not so close as to risk catching fire. Layers were arranged to allow airflow, preventing rot, mold, and dampness that could render even the finest logs useless. Many settlers built separate woodsheds or lean-tos, creating organized stacks that could last for months without decay. Each log had its place, each pile carefully managed, ensuring that when the coldest days arrived, warmth was always at hand. The hearth or stove was the centerpiece of the cabin. More than just a tool, it was a source of life and comfort. Fireplaces, often made of stone or brick, radiated heat and served as a focal point for the family. Iron stoves, when available, provided efficient warmth, radiating heat evenly throughout the small space. Settlers understood the physics of fire, arranging rocks or metal plates to retain and reflect warmth, directing heat towards sleeping areas and workspaces. They learned to manage flames carefully, feeding logs gradually, keeping embers glowing, and avoiding excessive smoke that could irritate eyes or lungs. Tending the fire was a ritual. Morning, afternoon, and night, someone in the household ensured that flames never died out. Sparks could be coaxed into life with kindling. Embers were nurtured with additional wood, and ashes were managed to maintain airflow. Even in the depth of winter, when snow piled high outside and winds howled through the valleys, the fire remained a constant, providing not only physical warmth but a psychological reassurance. Its glow offered comfort against isolation, a steady rhythm against the unpredictability of the mountain environment. Settlers also understood that heat needed to be managed efficiently. Drafts could sap warmth quickly, so doors were kept closed. Heavy blankets were hung over openings, and gaps were sealed with moss or cloth. Sleeping platforms were positioned close to the stove or hearth, ensuring that the family received maximum benefit from the fire. In larger cabins, partitions or screens might be used to direct heat to specific areas, preventing wastage and ensuring that even the coldest corners remained bearable. In this way, warmth became a deliberate practice, a science of survival that required careful observation and constant attention. Nighttime presented particular challenges. Temperatures dropped dramatically, often far below freezing, and the cabin could become unbearably cold if the fire faltered. Families developed routines to mitigate this. Before bed, they stoked the fire to ensure it would last through the night, arranging logs so that embers smoldered steadily. Blankets and quilts were layered thickly on sleeping platforms. Children slept close to their parents, and additional insulations such as straw, pine boughs, or animal hides was placed around doors and windows. Every inch of warmth was precious, and every precaution mattered. Even during the day, the fire remained central to life in the cabin. Meals were prepared over its flames. Water was heated for cleaning and bathing, and clothing could be dried against the warmth it radiated. Settlers used the fire to soften leather, cure hides, and perform countless household tasks that would be impossible in the cold alone. Fire became a hub of activity, a source of both sustenance and comfort, and a constant reminder that survival depended on careful planning, knowledge, and attentiveness. The process of heating the cabin was also tied to the natural rhythms of the seasons. As snow deepened and days grew shorter, settlers adjusted their routines, adding more wood, tending fires more frequently, and conserving heat during daylight hours. Long nights required greater vigilance, for even a single lapse could leave a family shivering in the darkness. By observing the environment, anticipating weather changes, and responding with discipline, settlers learned to maintain warmth efficiently, transforming the cabin into a haven against the harsh world outside. In addition to firewood and hearths, settlers developed strategies to maintain warmth in other ways. Clothing, bedding, and sleeping arrangements were integrated with heating practices. Heavy wool garments, layered clothing, and fur-lined hats protected against drafts. Beds were elevated above cold floors and insulated with straw, pine, boughs, and sheepskins. Children often slept near adults to share body heat, and the careful arrangement of household items helped to retain warmth throughout the cabin. Every detail, from the placement of a log to the folding of a quilt, contributed to survival. Water presented another challenge in winter. Streams could freeze, snow needed to be melted over the fire, and ice had to be chipped carefully to provide drinking water without exhausting energy or fuel. Settlers learned to balance fire use between cooking, heating, and water preparation, knowing that each decision affected comfort and safety. Simple routines, repeated daily, became essential survival practices, creating a rhythm of life that was attuned to the demands of the environment and the needs of the family. Beyond physical warmth, fire provided psychological comfort. Winter could be isolating, with snowdrifts cutting off contact with neighbors, and the landscape appearing vast and desolate. The hearth became a gathering place where stories were told, songs were sung, and family bonds were strengthened. Its glow represented stability, hope, and continuity, offering reassurance against the cold and the uncertainties of mountain life. Settlers often remarked that a well-tended fire was as important to morale as it was to survival. Even small innovations reflected the ingenuity of settlers. Metal plates or stones were sometimes positioned to retain heat longer, or small reflective surfaces placed to direct warmth to specific areas. Kindling was often gathered and dried indoors to ensure quick ignition, and clever stacking of logs allowed fires to burn steadily overnight. These practices evolved through experience, observation, and necessity, forming a body of knowledge that was shared among families and communities. The preparation of firewood and management of heat was not a seasonal task only, it was a year-round concern. During warmer months, settlers collected and stored wood, often cutting ahead for months, ensuring that supplies would last through the heaviest snows. Drying wood indoors or under covered shelters prevented moisture from reducing its effectiveness. Efficient stacking, rotation of older logs, and careful planning ensured that even in the coldest stretches, the cabin remained warm and habitable. Settlers also learned to respect the power of fire. Accidents could be catastrophic in the confined wooden space of a cabin, so stoves and hearths were maintained meticulously. Sparks, embers, and open flames required constant attention, and fire safety became a central part of daily routines. Families developed habits that prevented disasters, ensuring that the very element that sustained life did not turn into a threat. In essence, fire was the lifeblood of the cabin. It transformed the cold, silent, and often hostile environment of the Rockies into a space of warmth, security, and possibility. Settlers became attuned to its rhythms, learning to coax it, nurture it, and integrate it into every aspect of daily life. They understood that survival was not simply about labor or endurance, but about knowledge, observation, and the careful application of skill. The fire connected them to the environment, to each other, and to the rhythm of mountain life through careful planning, persistent labor, and constant vigilance. Settlers created cabins that were warm, safe, and livable even in the heart of winter. Fire, wood, and knowledge combined to provide comfort, sustain life, and maintain morale. These practices, repeated and refined over years, ensured that families could endure months of isolation, snow, and cold, transforming the Rockies from a forbidding wilderness into a home where life could continue, hope could flourish, and human ingenuity could shine. As the snow fell silently outside and the wind swept across frozen valleys, the settlers inside their cabins felt the warmth of their efforts, the crackle of logs, the soft glow of embers, and the comforting heat of the hearth provided a sense of security. It represented survival, resilience, and the careful orchestration of resources and knowledge. The fire became a companion, a teacher, and a protector, shaping the rhythm of daily life and sustaining the human spirit through the long frozen months. Even when storms raged and snow piled high outside, families could gather around the hearth, tending flames, sharing stories, and preserving a sense of community and connection. They understood that the fire was not only a tool but a symbol of life itself, a tangible expression of their courage, planning, and perseverance. In the glow of the hearth, the cabin became more than a shelter. It became a home, a sanctuary, and a testament to the resilience of those who dared to live in one of the most challenging environments on the continent. Surviving the frozen winters of the Rocky Mountains was not solely a matter of shelter or fire. It was also about the careful protection of the human body against relentless cold. For settlers, clothing and bedding were not luxuries. They were essential tools of survival's vital as the cabin itself. Every layer, every garment, every piece of fabric contributed to maintaining warmth, preserving health, and allowing life to continue amid the harshest conditions imaginable. The settlers' clothing was designed for practicality first, warmth second, though over time, practicality and warmth became inseparable. Wool became the primary material of choice, valued for its insulating qualities and its ability to retain warmth even when damp. Coats, pants, and vests were layered carefully, ensuring that no part of the body was exposed to biting wind or icy drafts. Underneath linen or cotton shirts provided a base layer that could wick moisture from the skin, keeping it dry and preventing chill. Settlers quickly learned that damp skin in freezing temperatures was far more dangerous than bare wood, floors, or cold walls. In addition to wool, animal hides played a crucial role. Deer, elk, and buffalo hides were transformed into coats, mittens, hats, and boots, providing both insulation and protection from wind and moisture. Fur, with its natural density and warmth, became a preferred material for outerwear, garments, and bedding alike. Every article was handcrafted with care, often sewn at home using leather thongs, sinew, or sturdy thread, ensuring durability in conditions that would quickly destroy mass-produced clothing. Boots were another essential item designed to keep feet warm and dry in snow and ice. Settlers relied on thick, solid leather boots, often lined with fur, carefully fitted to prevent blisters or frostbite. Snow and ice were constant challenges, so gaiters, wraps, or additional layers were sometimes employed to cover the ankles and lower legs, preventing cold from creeping upward. The body's extremities were particularly vulnerable. and settlers learned to check them regularly for signs of frostbite or cold injury. Hats, scarves, and mittens were equally critical. Head and hand coverings were not optional. They were essential for survival. Wool or fur hats prevented heat loss from the head, while scarves wrapped around the neck and face offered protection against windburn and freezing air. Mittens, often made from layered wool or fur, kept fingers warm while allowing flexibility for small tasks. Settlers learned to balance warmth with dexterity, adapting clothing to the tasks at hand, whether chopping wood, tending a fire, or gathering supplies outdoors. The process of dressing became a daily ritual of preparation. Layering was done carefully, with attention to movement and comfort. Wool socks were pulled up snugly. Trousers were adjusted for fit and warmth. Shirts were buttoned or tied, and coats were arranged to maximize insulation. Each garment served a purpose, and each layer added to the intricate system of defense against the coldest system, born of necessity, refined by experience, and essential to life in the frozen heart of the Rockies. Overall effectiveness of the ensemble. Settlers developed an intimate understanding of their clothing, knowing which combinations offered the best warmth, flexibility, and durability. Bedding, like clothing, was carefully considered. Beds were typically elevated platforms designed to keep occupants above cold, damp floors. Straw, pine, boughs, or dried grasses were used to create insulating layers, reducing heat loss through conduction. Sheepskins and quilts, often handmade from wool, provided additional warmth. Families sometimes layered blankets, creating multiple strata that could trap heat and preserve comfort through long, frigid nights. Children were often tucked close to their parents, sharing body heat in the confined spaces of small cabins. Every inch of warmth was precious, and every decision regarding bedding could mean the difference between comfort and peril. Sleep arrangements themselves became a strategy for survival. Settlers learned to cluster sleeping areas near the hearth or stove, using heat radiating from the fire to maintain warmth throughout the night. Extra insulation was placed around doors and windows, reducing drafts that could lower temperatures within the cabin. Clothing often remained on through the night, with heavy socks, hats, and mittens retained to prevent heat loss. Even seemingly small actions, stucking in blankets, arranging pillows, adjusting sleeping platforms, were critical elements in the art of staying warm. Children's clothing and bedding required particular attention. The young were more susceptible to cold, and frostbite could occur quickly. Settlers ensured that children were well layered, their extremities protected, and their bedding adequate for long nights. Storytelling and lullabies often accompanied these routines, blending warmth with comfort and emotional reassurance, creating an environment where children could sleep safely despite the harsh conditions outside. Settlers also adapted their clothing for daily chores and outdoor tasks. Layering was flexible, allowing garments to be removed during physical labor to prevent overheating and sweat, which could later contribute to chilling. Outer garments were often water-resistant or windproof, protecting against snow, sleet, and rain. Footwear was designed for traction, warmth, and durability, essential when traversing snow-covered trails, frozen streams, or icy hillsides. Gloves or mittens were removed carefully to perform delicate tasks, then replaced immediately to preserve heat. In addition to clothing and bedding, Settlers used other techniques to retain warmth. Thick curtains or blankets were hung over windows and doors, reducing drafts and containing heat. Floors might be covered with rushes, straw, or hides to prevent cold from seeping upward. Furniture was arranged strategically to minimize exposure to cold walls or windows, and small fires or heated stones were sometimes used to warm sleeping areas. Every tactic reflected careful observation, creativity, and the recognition that warmth could be maintained through both skill and ingenuity. Maintaining clothing and bedding was equally important. Wool garments were dried carefully near the fire or stove to prevent dampness, which could lead to chilling. Repairs were made promptly, with tiers stitched or reinforced to ensure continued protection. Quilts and blankets were aired and fluffed regularly, maintaining their insulating qualities. Settlers learned that attention to detail, consistency, and care were as important as the initial construction of clothing and bedding, for even the best materials could fail if neglected. Health considerations were tightly connected to clothing and bedding. Frostbite, hypothermia, and illness were constant threats, and settlers understood that prevention was critical. Proper insulation, layered clothing, and careful attention to personal warmth reduced the risk of injury or disease. Cold conditions could exacerbate minor ailments, making even small lapses in preparation potentially dangerous. Settlers approached every day with mindfulness, understanding that survival depended on constant vigilance, careful habits, and the integration of clothing, bedding, and heat management into a comprehensive strategy. Settlers' knowledge of their own bodies also played a role. They recognized signs of cold stress, such as numb fingers or toes, shivering, or pale skin, and responded immediately by adjusting clothing, moving closer to the fire, or adding bedding. They understood that energy levels, nutrition, and hydration influenced warmth, and they monitored themselves and their families for signs of fatigue or exposure. Survival was not merely about external measures. It was about self-awareness, adaptation, and ongoing management of both physical and environmental conditions. Even social and psychological factors influenced how settlers managed warmth. Families shared responsibilities for tending fires, preparing clothing, and arranging bedding. Older children often assisted younger siblings, distributing blankets or helping to adjust garments. Parents modeled techniques for staying warm, demonstrating layering, adjusting clothing, and managing bedding for maximum comfort. These practices were not only practical but also instructional, passing essential knowledge to the next generation in ways that ensured continued survival. Settlers also developed routines and rituals around personal warmth. Morning and evening were times for layering and preparation, ensuring that everyone was dressed appropriately before venturing outside or going to sleep. Midday activities were often adapted to account for changing temperatures, with breaks taken near the fire or in sheltered areas. Clothing and bedding were adjusted seasonally, reflecting an intimate understanding of the changing demands of winter. Through these routines, warmth became a predictable pattern that brought comfort, security, and a sense of order to daily life. Adaptation extended beyond basic survival. Settlers learned to optimize clothing and bedding for efficiency and longevity. Multi-purpose garments were created, capable of functioning both indoors and outdoors. quilts and blankets were layered strategically, allowing adjustments to changing temperatures throughout the night. Mittens and hats were designed to balance warmth and dexterity, enabling hands to remain functional while protected. Every innovation reflected careful observation, experimentation, and an intimate understanding of the challenges posed by the Rocky Mountain winter. The settlers' relationship with clothing and bedding was deeply connected to their sense of home. The cabin, the fire, and the garments formed an integrated system, each element supporting the other. Warmth was not incidental. It was deliberate, carefully maintained, and continually reinforced. In this way, clothing and bedding became more than practical tools. They became symbols of care, preparation, and the human capacity to endure and thrive in extreme conditions. By combining layered clothing, insulated bedding, careful routines, and strategic placement of sleeping areas, settlers created an environment within the cabin. Even when snow piled high outside, winds howled, and temperatures plummeted, families could rest, sleep, and recover. The cabin became a sanctuary, a space where the human body could be protected, nurtured, and restored. Every stitch, every layer, every precaution contributed to survival, reflecting a profound understanding of the environment and the needs of the human body in extreme cold. Through clothing, bedding, and personal strategies, settlers not only survived, they maintained health, preserved energy, and ensured continuity of life. Children grew, adults worked, and families persisted through the most challenging months of the year. Each day reinforced knowledge, resilience, and adaptation, creating a culture of survival that was passed down from one generation to the next. The careful management of warmth became a hallmark of Rocky Mountain life, a testament to human ingenuity, foresight, and the quiet determination that allowed settlers to endure even the harshest winters. As night fell and the wind swept across snow-covered valleys, the settlers nestled into their carefully prepared beds, wrapped in layers of wool, fur, and quilts. Fires glowed softly in the hearth, casting warmth and light across the cabin. Children slept close to their parents, blankets tucked snugly around them, hats pulled low, mittens kept at the ready. Outside, the frozen world was silent and still. Yet inside, the cabin was alive with comfort, safety, and the quiet triumph of careful preparation. In this environment, warmth was not simply a physical necessity. It was a measure of life, care, and connection. Clothing and bedding became extensions of the human body, tools through which survival was secured. Every night spent in comfort, every day protected from frostbite, every child safely tucked into a warm bed was a victory against the frozen wilderness. Settlers learned to honor these routines, to respect the power of layering, insulation, and careful preparation, and to recognize that human ingenuity, attention to detail, and dedication could overcome even the harshest conditions. Even as winter stretched on, with days shortened and nights lengthened, settlers maintained their routines. Clothing was adjusted, bedding refreshed, and fires carefully tended. Every action reinforced survival, comfort, and health. Through these practices, families endured isolation, cold, and the challenges of living far from towns, trade routes, or assistance. They created homes within the mountain spaces that offered warmth, security, and a profound sense of continuity amidst the unforgiving winter landscape. as winter approached in the Rocky Mountains. Settlers knew that survival depended not only on shelter, warmth, and clothing, but also on food. The frozen months were long and isolating, with deep snow covering trails, streams freezing solid, and wildlife moving carefully through the landscape. Access to fresh food became limited, and settlers needed to plan months in advance to ensure that their families would have enough to eat. Food was not merely sustenance, it was survival, and careful preparation could mean the difference between enduring the winter or succumbing to hunger and hardship. Months before the first snowfall, families began to gather and preserve their provisions. Root vegetables such as potatoes, carrots, turnips, and parsnips were harvested from carefully tended gardens. These vegetables were hardy, able to withstand cooler temperatures, and could be stored for months if kept in the right conditions. Settlers often dug cellars into hillsides, creating insulated storage spaces that maintained cool but above freezing temperatures. Protecting vegetables from freezing solid, straw, leaves, and soil were used to layer and insulate the root crops, further ensuring that they remained edible throughout the harshest months. Grains and legumes were equally important. Wheat, barley, oats, beans, and peas provided essential nutrients and could be stored in barrels or sacks for extended periods. Settlers took care to keep these staples dry and protected from pests, often constructing simple wooden containers or sealing sacks to prevent spoilage. Knowledge of storage methods was passed down through families, with careful attention paid to rotation, inspection, and the maintenance of supplies. Every bushel of grain represented weeks of labor and would be relied upon when snow covered the valleys and trails were impassable. Meat preservation was perhaps the most challenging yet vital task. Hunting and trapping provided essential protein, but fresh meat could not last for long in freezing temperatures without careful preparation. Settlers employed methods such as smoking, salting, and drying to extend the shelf life of their game. Deer, elk, rabbit, and small game were processed carefully, with every usable part stored or prepared. Smoking involved hanging strips of meat near the cabin hearth or in small smokehouses, allowing the heat and smoke to dehydrate the meat and infuse it with preservative properties. Salting required a careful balance, coating the meat in salt to draw out moisture and prevent spoilage. Drying, whether over the fire or in sunny conditions before winter, removed excess water and made the meat lightweight and transportable. Preserving food was not limited to meat and vegetables. Fruits, when available, were dried, canned, or transformed into preserves and jams. Berries gathered during summer and early fall were sun-dried or boiled with sugar, creating concentrated stores of nutrition and flavor. Settlers often combined these preserves with grains or root vegetables to create nourishing meals that would sustain them through the cold months. Honey, when available, served both as a sweetener and as a preservative, added to preserves or stored for consumption. Every jar, sack, or bundle was a carefully managed resource representing foresight, labor, and ingenuity. Hunting and trapping were not seasonal activities alone. They were continuous, adaptive practices that supplemented stored food. Settlers learned the habits and patterns of local wildlife, understanding where to set traps, when to hunt, and how to maximize yield while minimizing risk. Snow provided both opportunities and challenges. Tracks allowed experienced hunters to follow prey, but deep snow and icy terrain made travel exhausting and dangerous. Hunters balanced the need for food with the necessity of safety, carefully planning excursions and returning with provisions that could be shared and stored. Fishing, when rivers were not completely frozen, also supplemented the diet. Settlers used nets, lines, and traps to catch fish, often preparing and preserving the catch for winter. Ice fishing became a common practice once rivers froze, requiring patience, skill, and understanding of the behavior of fish under ice. Even small catches contributed to the family's nutrition, supplementing preserved vegetables, grains, and meats. Every method, every catch, was integrated into a larger strategy for surviving the winter months. Families developed detailed routines to manage their food supply efficiently. Daily meals were planned to conserve staples, with attention to portions, balance, and energy needs. Leftovers were carefully stored, and food was rationed during periods when hunting or gathering yielded less than expected. Cooking was done over the hearth or stove, with careful attention to fuel conservation. Stews, soups, and porridges became common dishes, combining preserved vegetables, grains, and meats into nourishing, calorie-rich meals that could sustain families through long, cold days. Foraging also played a critical role in winter survival. Settlers gathered nuts, berries, and edible plants during the fall, often storing them carefully for use during the coldest months. Knowledge of edible plants and safe preparation methods was essential, for consuming the wrong vegetation could be dangerous. Even during winter, some hardy plants could be found beneath the snow, providing small but valuable sources of nutrition. Settlers became intimately familiar with the land, learning to identify useful resources and integrate them into their diet. In addition to sustenance, food served a psychological purpose. The act of preparing meals, preserving supplies, and sharing food around the hearth brought comfort, continuity, and a sense of security. Even in the depths of winter, when snow blocked trails and neighbors were distant, the presence of food provided reassurance that survival was possible. Families gathered to eat together, the warmth of the fire complementing the warmth of nourishment and human connection. Meals became rituals, reinforcing routines and providing structure to long, monotonous winter days. Water management was equally critical. Streams froze, snow had to be melted, and ice had to be carefully chipped to provide fresh drinking water. Settlers learned to store water indoors when possible, melting it over the stove or fire for cooking, drinking, and cleaning. Boiling was often used to purify water, ensuring it was safe for consumption. Even small quantities of fresh water were precious, requiring careful management and planning to prevent shortages during prolonged periods of isolation. Settlers' diets were often limited in variety, but rich in sustenance. Meals were designed to maximize caloric intake and energy efficiency, reflecting both necessity and ingenuity. Stews combined preserved meats, grains, and vegetables, while porridges or soups provided warmth and nourishment in a single, efficient dish. Bread was baked from stored grains, sometimes supplemented with dried fruits or nuts, creating energy-dense food that could sustain laboring bodies. Every meal represented a balance between taste, nutrition, and survival, carefully calculated to meet the needs of families enduring long months of winter. Trade and bartering supplemented food stores when possible. Neighbors exchanged surplus grains, preserved meats, or other resources, strengthening community ties and ensuring that even during lean times, families could maintain their supplies. Occasional trips to nearby settlements allowed for replenishment of essential items. Though travel was risky, slow, and often dependent on weather conditions, settlers relied heavily on self-sufficiency, but trade provided a valuable supplement, allowing for variety and security in the diet. Insects, vermin, and spoilage were constant threats to stored food. Settlers took precautions, sealing containers, elevating supplies off the ground, and regularly inspecting stored items. Knowledge of pests, storage techniques, and preservation methods was critical, for a small failure could compromise weeks or months of preparation. Every sack, barrel, and bundle was managed carefully, reflecting a culture of attention, foresight, and practical wisdom. Settlers also adapted to the rhythm of winter, adjusting food consumption to match energy needs and availability. Physical labor demanded calories, while periods of rest required less. Families monitored portions, rotated supplies, and conserved energy where possible. Even small decisions, such as when to consume preserved meat versus fresh game, were informed by an intimate understanding of resources, the environment, and the demands of daily life. Nutrition and variety were maintained where possible. Root vegetables, grains, preserved meats, and dried fruits were combined in creative ways to provide both sustenance and enjoyment. Cooking techniques evolved, using fire efficiently while maximizing flavor and nutrition. Stews and soups allowed multiple ingredients to be combined, creating hearty, warming meals that reinforced both physical and emotional resilience. Settlers learned to appreciate the small pleasures of food, understanding that morale, energy, and health were intertwined. Families often assigned roles and responsibilities for food management. One member might oversee the fire and cooking, another the preservation of meat or vegetables, and children might assist in gathering, cleaning, or arranging supplies. These routines created a structured system, ensuring that every task was completed efficiently and that resources were maintained throughout the winter. Coordination and shared responsibility reinforced both survival and family bonds, embedding knowledge and skills that would be passed to the next generation. Hunting, trapping, and fishing required patience, skill, and an understanding of animal behavior. Tracks in the snow revealed the movement of deer, rabbits, and other game, while knowledge of seasonal patterns allowed settlers to anticipate availability. Traps were set carefully, snares placed along known trails, and hunting excursions timed to minimize risk while maximizing yield. Ice fishing, snow tracking, and winter hunting became essential skills integrated into daily life and critical to maintaining a reliable food supply, even in the harshest months. Settlers found ways to diversify their diet. Preserved berries, dried fruits, nuts, and honey supplemented the staples of meat, grains, and root vegetables. Occasionally, small game could be caught near the cabin, and snow-covered forests provided opportunities for foraging. These additions, though modest, contributed to nutrition, morale, and the feeling of abundance. in an environment defined by scarcity. Food management was also tied to community. Settlers often shared surplus supplies with neighbors, exchanging preserved goods, hunting tips, and culinary knowledge. This sharing reinforced social bonds, increased security, and provided emotional support during isolation. Even the smallest gestures, such as lending flour or exchanging dried meat, contributed to survival and the collective resilience of families facing winter together. Through careful preservation, strategic hunting, thoughtful meal planning, and diligent resource management, settlers ensured that their families could survive months of snow, ice, and isolation. Every preserved root vegetable, every salted or smoked piece of meat, every carefully stored grain represented foresight, skill, and the determination to endure. Winter was a time of both challenge and mastery, where knowledge, patience, and discipline converged to sustain life in the Rocky Mountains. As the nights lengthened and the wind howled across frozen valleys, settlers gathered around the hearth to prepare and share meals. The warmth of fire complemented the nourishment of food, creating an environment of safety, comfort, and routine. Children learned the rhythms of gathering, preparing, and consuming food, observing parents and elders, absorbing skills that would ensure their survival in the harsh winters to come. Even when storms isolated cabins and travel became impossible, families had prepared carefully enough to endure. Stored food provided sustenance, preserved game supplemented energy, and knowledge of preservation ensured that supplies would last. Every meal represented not only nutrition but security, hope, and the triumph of human ingenuity over the challenges of a frozen landscape. The settlers' careful attention to food preservation and supply management was a testament to their resilience. Months of preparation, combined with knowledge of hunting, foraging, and cooking, allowed families to maintain health, energy, and morale. Even in isolation, snowbound cabins offered warmth, nourishment, and stability, reflecting the culmination of planning, labor, and adaptation. In this way, food became more than sustenance. It became a cornerstone of survival, a symbol of human foresight, and a tangible measure of endurance in the harsh winters. Survival was not merely an individual effort. It became a shared endeavor, tapestry of interwoven lives, skills, and perseverance. While cabins, firewood, clothing, and food provided the tangible means to endure the cold, it was the bonds of family, neighbors, and community that sustained the human spirit. Isolation in a snowbound landscape could have been unbearable, yet settlers found ways to maintain connection, share resources, and draw strength from one another. They learned often through necessities. Endurance was as much social and emotional as it was physical. Families became the primary unit of resilience. Each member contributed to the ongoing maintenance of survival, from gathering firewood to preparing meals, tending livestock, and managing supplies. Children were taught from an early age the rhythms of mountain life, learning practical skills and the importance of observation, patience, and adaptability. Tasks were assigned according to ability, with older children taking on responsibilities that supported the household while younger ones assisted in simpler chores. Even in the confines of a small cabin, the family became a system of interdependency, each individual's effort reinforcing the whole. The the emotional and psychological dimensions of community were equally vital. Long winter nights were isolating, and snowdrifts could cut off paths to neighbors for days or weeks at a time. Yet, families created rituals and routines that nurtured morale. Storytelling, songs, and shared memories became common practices, offering not just entertainment but comfort. By recounting tales of past challenges, successes, and adventures, elders reinforced resilience and imparted wisdom to younger generations. Laughter, gentle teasing, and storytelling were small but powerful acts of endurance, reminding families that human connection could persist even in extreme conditions. Beyond the individual cabin, neighbors often formed informal networks of mutual support. Though distances between homesteads could be significant, settlers would exchange information, resources, and assistance. When possible, a neighbor might lend tools, share preserved food, or assist in emergency repairs to a cabin or roof damaged by snow. Even the simplest interactions reinforced a sense of community, creating a safety net that enhanced survival and alleviated the sense of isolation. Over time, these networks became structured, with families relying on one another for both practical needs and emotional sustenance. Communication in winter required ingenuity. Snow-covered valleys and frozen rivers impeded travel, so messages and supplies were often delivered by familiar routes marked by tracks in the snow. Settlers learned to read these trails, understanding the movement of both humans and animals, and adapted their own routines to take advantage of safe paths. These practices became a form of communal intelligence, with knowledge shared and preserved, ensuring that the network of support could function even under harsh conditions. Work itself became a communal and social activity. Activities like chopping firewood, hunting, or repairing cabins often involved multiple families working together through shared labor. Settlers not only accomplished practical tasks more efficiently, but also reinforced relationships, exchanged skills, and transmitted knowledge. A group working together in the freezing cold, laughing, encouraging one another, and sharing tips created a rhythm of life that alleviated the mental strain of isolation. Even simple cooperation became a lifeliner mechanism for maintaining both physical and emotional endurance. Celebrations and seasonal rituals helped break the monotony of winter. Festivals, holidays, or gatherings, even small ones, provided structure, anticipation, and joy. Families might gather around a large fire, exchange stories or songs, and enjoy a meal prepared with care. These events reinforced social bonds and reminded settlers that life could continue meaningfully despite harsh conditions. Anticipation of such moments provided motivation to persevere, making the long nights more bearable and sustaining hope through the depths of winter. Education and learning were woven into daily life, often informally, but with profound effects on resilience. Elders taught children essential survival skills: how to chop wood efficiently, how to preserve food, how to read the weather, and how to navigate the frozen landscape. These lessons extended beyond technical skills, encompassing patience, observation, and judgment. By learning from experience, children developed confidence and competence, which became essential for long-term survival and the continuity of the community. Knowledge was not static, but passed orally, demonstrated through example, and reinforced through practice, forming a living legacy that connected generations. Religion spirituality, and reflection played subtle but meaningful roles in endurance. Settlers often drew comfort from prayer, meditation, or quiet contemplation by the hearth. These practices offered solace and perspective, reminding families of their values, purpose, and hope. Even in extreme cold and isolation, the spiritual dimension provided a framework for understanding hardship, interpreting natural events, and cultivating patience and resilience. It created a sense of continuity and meaning, helping individuals to withstand adversity without succumbing to despair. Adaptability was central to both survival and community cohesion. Settlers constantly adjusted to changing conditions, whether sudden blizzards, frozen water sources, or unexpected shortages of food or firewood. Decisions were informed by careful observation, experience, and sometimes improvisation. Families communicated, collaborated, and negotiated solutions to immediate problems, ensuring that resources were allocated efficiently and that everyone could endure the harsh winter. These adaptive strategies reflected a combination of practical intelligence, emotional resilience, and social cooperation. Hunting, trapping, and gathering, though critical for sustenance, also reinforced community interdependence. Sharing the spoils of a successful hunt, lending assistance in trapping, or exchanging foraged goods strengthened bonds between families. Skills were taught across households, and communal knowledge grew richer over time. In an environment where individual efforts could easily fail due to unforeseen challenges, collaboration became a critical factor in ensuring that all families could survive and thrive. Storytelling, oral history, and memory served as tools of endurance. Tales of past winters, previous hardships, and successful strategies for survival were shared widely. Children learned about snowstorms that had isolated families for weeks, strategies for managing dwindling food supplies, and lessons about respecting the land and its wildlife. These narratives reinforced not only practical knowledge, but also confidence, courage, and the understanding that survival was possible even in the most extreme circumstances. The human spirit, reinforced through memory and storytelling, became as vital as firewood or preserved food. Health, both physical and emotional, was a communal concern. Families monitored one another for signs of frostbite, malnutrition, or illness, offering care and support when needed. Knowledge of herbal remedies, treatments for colds and coughs, and basic first aid was shared and applied within the cabin and across neighborhoods. This collective vigilance increased the likelihood of survival and reinforced the social bonds that underpinned the community's resilience. Caring for one another became an essential practice, intertwining survival with empathy and connection. Resourcefulness extended beyond daily survival. Settlers learned to reuse, repair, and repurpose materials to meet unexpected challenges. Broken tools were mended, worn clothing was patched, and discarded items were transformed into useful objects.